Hello learners of English, welcome to the channel. What have you noticed about buses in your local area? Are they good? Are they cheap? Are they expensive, dirty, clean? Well, in this video, I would like to share with you what I, as a person from England, have noticed about buses in Russia, which is where I currently live. The first thing I have noticed is that in Russia, many buses have conductors. Conductors, as you probably know, are people who collect payments from passengers on buses, and sometimes they check if people are doing bad things on the bus, and I believe conductors have the right to kick people off a bus. I'm not sure if buses in Moscow still have conductors, but this is definitely true for Novosibirsk, which is the city where I am currently living. When I first moved to Novosibirsk a few years ago, I was surprised to find out that the buses have conductors, and one really funny thing that I only just noticed when I moved to Novosibirsk is that every bus has a seat with a pillow on it. And when I first moved here, I sat on a seat with a pillow on it, and the conductor came up to me and got very angry because I did not realize that that pillow is the conductor's way of designating their own seat. Being a conductor in Russia or in any country is actually a very difficult job. I don't believe it pays much money, but I have a lot of respect for conductors because they have a very difficult job, particularly in rush hour when there are many passengers on a bus and the conductors have to squeeze past everyone and they have to have a lot of energy having to sit down and stand up, sit down, stand up, squeeze past people. It takes a lot of energy and they have to balance very carefully on their feet when they are collecting payment from people, and also they have to count the change very carefully because I think they can get in trouble if they don't collect the right amount of payment. So being a conductor is a very difficult job. I have a lot of respect for them. And quite often I have found that conductors get really stressed out in rush hour. I have heard conductors shouting at people on several occasions, and usually they have to speak really loudly so then people notice them. Quite often I have noticed conductors saying "Кто не рассчитался," which means who hasn't paid up yet. And this is quite funny because I have never come across this before in the UK. In the UK, we don't have conductors on buses. We used to, but not anymore. Nowadays in London, most payments are collected through payment terminals on a bus and not in cash. The next thing I've noticed is that in Novosibirsk at least, for some reason on buses, the front doors do not usually open. The bus drivers rarely open the front doors. They only open the middle and rear doors of a bus. I'm not sure why this is the case. There must be a good reason for this, but this very rarely happens. Maybe you might know the answer. I would like to hear from you if you know the answer for this. I am not sure if this is the case in Moscow or if this is only true in Novosibirsk. But when I first moved to Novosibirsk, I was surprised to find that the front doors of the bus simply do not open, and I had to race to the back of the bus to get on the bus in time. The next thing I've noticed is the wonderful marshrutski in Russia. There is no direct translation for the word marshrutka in English, but if I had to describe a marshrutka, I would call them little minivans which operate on specific routes. Marshrutki are rather chaotic modes of transport, although I kind of love them. I have grown to love marshrutsky, but it is an acquired taste. What I don't understand about marshrutsky is that they are more expensive than general buses. In Novosibirsk, the general bus and metro fare currently is 35 rubles, and marshrutsky can range from 50 to sometimes 60 rubles if they go a long distance. I don't understand why they're more expensive, because marshrutsky are usually very cramped, tight spaces. They have very cramped, tight spaces, and there's usually many passengers inside them, and they're just not very comfortable to be on. And the funny thing I have noticed about marshrutsky is that you have to shout really loudly to the driver when you would like the bus to stop. This is such an alien concept for me. In England, we just press a little button to ask the bus driver to stop at the next stop. But in Russia, you have to say, "Can I stop at the next stop, please? Na ostanovke." And you have to shout really loudly, or else the bus driver might not notice. And quite often the marshrutka drivers, they are speaking to a relative on their phone or to a friend on their phone, or they're just not listening. And quite often the marshrutka drivers, they drive like crazy people. I believe in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, I believe that marshrutsky are being phased out. I believe they do not exist anymore, although I could be wrong, so let me know if I'm wrong. Another thing I have noticed about marshrutsky is every city in Russia has a different policy when it comes to paying the driver. In Novosibirsk, you need to pay the marshrutka driver when you get on the bus. But I have noticed in other cities, you pay the marshrutka driver when you get off the bus. I have noticed this in Tomsk, which is not far from Novosibirsk, and I have noticed this in Grozny, in Chechnya, which is also, of course, in Russia. And I noticed that their people pay the driver when they get off the bus. So I'm not sure how to understand what the policy is in which city. I guess you just have to copy what the locals are doing. But I remember I had to ask people in Tomsk, when do I pay the driver? Because it was really confusing for me, being someone who is currently living in Novosibirsk. Moving on to the next topic, I've noticed that, well, I've mentioned before, the bus fare in Novosibirsk is 35 rubles. When I first moved to Novosibirsk, the bus fare was 27 rubles. This was only a few years ago, so the bus fares have definitely gone up, although I should say 35 rubles for a bus fare is actually really reasonable. Although I do need to say that the salaries in Novosibirsk are much lower than salaries in Moscow. In London, I believe the bus fare today is £1.75. That's really expensive. That's like 200 rubles. So that is more than a few times more expensive than the bus fare in Novosibirsk. I believe in Moscow the bus fare is 60 rubles, which is considerably more expensive than Novosibirsk. I do need to double check the actual bus fare in Moscow, but I have heard that it is 60 rubles. I know that if you have a travel card, you can get a discounted fare. What is a travel card? They are plastic cards which you can buy, and they give you discounted fares when you use public transportation. In London, our travel card has a funny name. In London, the travel card is called an Oyster card. Why do we call the travel cards Oyster cards? We have a really interesting idiom in English, which I believe comes from Shakespeare, although I don't particularly care about Shakespeare. I don't read Shakespeare, but I have read that this idiom comes from Shakespeare. The idiom is, "The world is your oyster." This idiom means that you are able to do whatever you like. Usually people use this idiom when they are speaking to young people. They say to them, you have all the opportunities available to you in the world. You can do whatever you like. The world is your oyster. So in London, the reason why the travel card is called an Oyster card is the city's way of telling people that they can go and do whatever they like. In London, I believe to get an Oyster card, it only costs £5 and you can buy them from most tube or underground stations, and then you can top up the card at an underground station whenever you like. In Novosibirsk, I believe there is also a travel card. I personally do not own one. I believe it costs 2,600 and something rubles per month. I do not travel on the bus frequently enough to warrant buying a travel card. Although if I traveled every day on the bus, then maybe I would consider buying a travel card. In Moscow, they are called troika cards, and I don't know what the fare is for using a troika card, but I believe that if you live in Moscow, you need to get a troika card because it is considerably cheaper than not having one. Moving on to the next topic. In Novosibirsk, we have a lot of wonderful old buses. I love them. A lot of locals do not love them, but I love these really old buses because they have so much soul and character to them. Although many of these buses are being replaced by brand new buses and brand new trolley buses, I should say, because in Novosibirsk we have trolley buses. And these new buses are built, I believe, in Belarus. There is a big trolley bus company called Maz. I believe it is Minsky Avtozavod, so Minsk car factory. And these buses are very clean, they're very modern, they're great buses, but they don't have any character to them. In Novosibirsk, we still have these buses called paziki. If you are Russian, you will definitely know what a pazik is. And they are adorable little buses, and they look like they come from the Soviet Union. Even if they were not made during the Soviet Union, they have a very Soviet feel to them, and I absolutely love this. And what's more is that the paziki quite often have these gas cylinders on top of them, and this is such an alien concept for me coming from England, because in Russia I believe many buses and sometimes cars run on actual gas. I'm not talking about gas as in petrol, like the American word gas. I mean actual gas, and it's gas in a cylinder, I mean. I have heard that it is much cheaper to run a bus on gas cylinders. And many locals in Novosibirsk want to see these buses disappear, but I don't want to see them disappear. Because in London, where I am originally from, we used to have these old, beautiful double-decker buses called Route Masters. Route Masters were really interesting buses. The bus driver sat in a cabin which was completely separate from the passengers, and Route Masters usually had a conductor on them, and at the back of the bus there was no door, so you could hop on and hop off the bus at any time. And this was so cool, it had so much character and soul to it. But unfortunately the old Route Masters have been phased out in England, and this is really sad. It's like England has lost its character, or at least London has lost its character. Now in London you can only find these modern era plasticky buses, and they just don't have any soul, they don't have any character. And I love seeing these old buses here in Novosibirsk and in other Russian cities. So I hope these buses don't get phased out, although I have read that they are getting phased out, and many locals are very happy about this, but I am definitely not happy about this. So let's end the video there. Let me know what you have noticed about buses in your local town and practice your English writing skills in the comments section below. So thank you so much. I hope to see you again in another video, and bye for now.